matching incredible students to great colleges one story at a time. This is the College Match podcast, and today I'm changing it up a bit. This very special episode highlights one of our incredible alumna, Esmeralda, who graduated this year from Yale University, class of 2020. During the interview, we unpack so much about college access for first-generation students, and this episode truly highlights the essence of our program. Join me as Esmeralda takes me on a journey through her life, the college application process, and what ultimately led to her choosing Yale out of the 6 Ivy League colleges she was accepted to. Yes, you heard me right, 6 Ivy League colleges. As a chemical engineer, Esmeralda also shares some of the experiences she's had as a Latina in the STEM field and opens up about what it was like to be the first in her family to leave home and find power in her voice at such a prestigious university. Trust me, you don't want to miss this special and very powerful story. If this is your first time tuning in, welcome. Take a few minutes to listen to our intro episode so you can hear all about College Match and the work we do. So to all the dreamers, believers, and achievers, teachers, educators, and supporters, thank you for tuning in. Let's get started. All right, welcome everybody to the College Match podcast. Today is a very special day. We actually have a different type of interview for the audience, which is an alumna interview. So Esmeralda, who is my guest today, not only joined us in College Match as a junior, like most of our students do, but has since transitioned in and out of college through our guidance, but also through her own just personal journey. And so Esmeralda, I'm so excited to interview you today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me. I know this is the first podcast with an alumni, so I'm really honored to be here and share my story with you.
So you'll be hearing a little bit more about Esmeralda, her journey through college. But before we do that, let's set some context of who you are and where you come from. So can you share a little bit about your background?
Yeah, definitely. So I guess the history of my family starts back in Mexico. So both of my parents are from Mexico. They're both from really small towns. Basically, not like they're not on the map or anything. So I've actually never visited, which is like unfortunate. But they're very small towns. I guess very different than what America is like. And they both actually moved to the US when they were in their late teens. So I think my dad was around 16. My mom might have been like 19 when she came here. When they were kids, they suffered through a lot of poverty. So, Mexico has always had like a long tradition of having a lot of economy issues. And so there's a big wealth gap.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was really hard to make ends meet. I remember when I was growing up, my dad was really excited when they finally like established like a telephone service in his like town.
Oh, wow.
And this is way later. This is like probably 2000s. And so that's how small this place is. And it's interesting because it's only like about an hour away from Mexico City, which is like one of the biggest cities in like the world. And yet it's like so like
Rural.
isolated and rural. And so yeah, that's kind of where they're from. And then they came to LA and they settled in downtown LA for a couple years, and then eventually moved to Boyle Heights or East LA, which is where we currently live. And I'm really proud of being from here. So yeah, that's kind of a little like quick snapshot of my family history.
I mean, talk about so many obstacles and sacrifices both of your parents had to make. It sounds like they gave up so much, which is the common
Yeah.
narrative, like you said.
Hmm.
Although everyone has their individual story, that common narrative of sacrificing who I am, where I come from, so that my children and my next generation can have
Hmm.
a better future.
Yeah, so my dad actually uh, worked for, I guess it's interesting. This is kind of tied to the history of LA as a city. So I think for a long time, LA was kind of the big producer in like the garment industry. So like a lot of big factories like or big companies like Forever 21, American Apparel used to all create like their garments here in the States in LA, the fashion district. So he started working in the garment industry since he came here. So like when he was like 16 or 17 years old,
Wow.
and he kept doing that. He kept doing that until I was a senior in high school. So maybe like 4 or 5 years ago is when things kind of changed, because a lot of these companies were starting to close and move their like operations to China or other countries because of the economic, like, I guess they just are able to pay people less there than here. And even here, my dad was getting paid like 10 cents a piece.
Oh my gosh.
Or like, and like 25 cents a piece was like, oh my god, like this is a lot of money. So he was paid by how many garments he produced a day. And so it was interesting. I used to go when I was younger, so he
Oh,
used to work from 6 a.m. to like p.m. And then it was Monday through Saturday, and it was just like a really interesting like experience. Now that I'm older and I look back at that, I'm just like, oh wow, like this is
mhm.
crazy. Because I guess people didn't really talk about stuff like this back then, because like, I don't know, social media wasn't as big, or like I don't know, there was just not
Right.
like a emphasis on stuff like this going on in the country. But now, because I think people are more aware of things, I think there's a little bit more awareness of like the conditions that people were working in, like in these factories, and like just the lack of I guess like employment benefits they received. Like there was no breaks. Like you were getting paid less than minimum wage. Like you didn't have a salary or anything. So it was really hard, I guess, financially growing up for us, because we always kind of were dealing with like how much work he would get from like the companies, like if they were getting like a big shipment from, or a big order from a certain company. And so it was always kind of like a interesting situation to be in. I remember when I would go, there was like a little workstation, and then next to it, it would have like a couple desks where they would like lay the like the completed pieces down. So I would sit like on the edge of that little like table, and I would just sit there. And it was really boring, because for a little kid, you're just like, oh, when are we gonna go home? But it was really great, I think, because I got to see like how much work my dad was putting into like feeding me, and like giving me like a better opportunity, right? I can still hear like the like constant like buzzing of the machines going, because yeah, it was just like nonstop. You could just hear everybody like working. It's just kind of crazy.
I mean, and being a
Yeah.
6-year-old and then the concept of, getting paid for your work and like none of that passes you, right? All of that
Yeah.
stuff passes over you. But now to think about, 10 cents a garment, I mean, how little
Yeah.
that is. And then to think how that transferred over to countries that are getting less than that. I mean, it really
Yeah,
puts into perspective
it
the
really
clothes
does.
that we're wearing and the amount of work that goes into it, but also the injustice behind all of it, right? Things that just
Yeah.
don't dawn on you until you're an adult sometimes. Esmeralda's dad had to switch jobs after the garment industry moved abroad. His new job as a fish distributor finally allows him to travel through Southern California and see places other than East Los Angeles. And Esmeralda's mom has been a stay at home mom since she can remember. As the matriarch of the family, she always encouraged Esmeralda to prioritize her education and strive for the best. Her brother Alfredo is 6 years older than Esmeralda. He was the first one in their family to go to college at UC Riverside, and since he was so much older than her, was not really there for her formative years. However, despite their age gap, Esmeralda remains very close with Alfredo, who not only introduced their family to Bravo High School, where she later attended, but he was also there during most of her transformational moments in college.
He went to college when I was like in sixth grade or something, like sixth or seventh grade. So that's kind of when I guess that's kind of when things changed for me. Like I was like going through like the teenage years, and I think that's like a really formative part. But he was kind of absent for a lot of that, because he went to school. He went to UC Riverside.
Okay.
So he like lived on campus and stuff. So he wasn't really around as often.
I mean, not just are you like going through adolescence, but because
Hmm.
it sounds like he was far away during the time that you were also applying to college, right? So
Yeah.
I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but did you have to do a lot of that process, I guess, on your own too? And since your parents, even though they had been through it before,
Yeah.
your case was a little bit different. Esmeralda attended Bravo Medical Magnet High School, a STEM focused school in Los Angeles. While there, she participated in the STAR program, Scripps College Academy, National Honor Society, and much more. And she was also introduced to College Match her sophomore year. When she finally started her applications, she realized her process was going to be very different from her brother's.
So it's a very, very different process applying to private schools than the UCs or the Cal States, right? My parents were very clueless sometimes, and it wasn't like they didn't want to know. It was just so many things that they just didn't understand because my parents don't speak English. They never learned how to speak English. They just are very like I guess they just have always worked so much in their daily lives that they never had time to, you know, like sit down and learn like English as a language, which is a very difficult language to learn.
For sure.
Yeah, so when you're not a native speaker, it's very hard. So they, you know, they couldn't really help us as much as like maybe other parents who might have spoken the language, right? So we had to do FAFSA and like all of that really tricky things on our own because we really didn't know who to ask, and especially him because he didn't really have as much help as I did with College Match. So I guess we both ended up going to Bravo Medical Magnet High School here in Boyle Heights. And I think Bravo as a high school is a very unique place. It's not a typical high school in the way that you see in like the Hollywood movies or anything. It's very different because it's a very small school. It's only a building. So we didn't have a football team, you know, it was just like a very different dynamic. I think that, you know, the social circles were a little different at Bravo as well. And yeah, it was, I ended up there for the 4 years, and I became involved with College Match as a junior, and that's kind of when my like college application process started. And it was a really long process, to be quite honest with you. It was just a lot of back and forth between like schools and between like like the SAT people and stuff, because you know it can get kind of complicated.
Absolutely. But I feel like, I mean, if you put it into perspective, you know, for listeners today who are applying to college, I think what you're going through is very soon what those students will be going through, you know? So definitely share, like, what were some of those challenges and obstacles along the way, and what brought you, because we haven't even mentioned where you ended up going, which is exciting where you ended up, but we'll get there. So what that journey brought you to.
So the story, I guess, really starts my sophomore year of high school. So the kids, the year above me, they were at the trip in the New England trip, and I remember we all of my friends and I from the sophomore class, we like saw their Facebook posts of how they were at Harvard and how they were like traveling to Dartmouth and Yale, and we're like, oh my god, like they're going for free, that's so cool, like I want to do that, like where do I sign up, like I want to do that, right? And junior year comes around, right? And I think Michelle, so my College Match counselor was Michelle, and she's like honestly like one of the best people I've ever met. And I remember like the next semester when we started SAT classes, that's kind of when the real work started.
Yeah, absolutely. That's when it's like the launch for you guys.
Yeah, and I remember going to Bell and going to the classes. So the amazing thing that College Match did was that it provided a lot of us like first gen low income students with like SAT classes, and I think that's like super duper like great because I didn't know how to take the SAT, you know, like the SAT it's really a game, which is like unfortunate because there's a lot of little tricks here and there that will get you like a higher score. And so I remember like our first class with my instructor, his name was Mike. So he really like helped me look at things with like a pattern view and not so much a like test view. And I think that's really helpful for me. So I'm really grateful for him because even though he was like, you know, kind of a tough love kind of guy, he really like improved, you know, my performance on this exam.
Like things have shifted since COVID-19, right? So obviously a lot of colleges are what we're calling like test optional, so to speak, not necessarily emphasizing it, but you're also talking about like life skills, right? Tests are not going to go away. Standardized tests are not going to go away. When you're in college, they're definitely not going to go away. So it sounds like regardless of whether SAT is optional now or ACT is optional, you know, those are life skills: how to master exams, how to find patterns in things, how to like think quickly on the spot because of being timed. So yeah, awesome.
Yeah. And then we ended up going on the New England trip, which was just life changing for me, honestly. I had never ever traveled through like planes before. I had never gone on an airplane before, and I was up until this trip. I think I was like 16 years old at this point. So I had never gone anywhere outside of California or like through plane or anything. So it was my first time going to anywhere. And to me, it was just like crazy because I mean, when I was a kid and even now, like you see the ball drop in Times Square. And to me, I just was like, this is like, that's a completely different reality from where I
Yeah,
am. Like, I just
world.
never imagined myself being there. And like, just at all, I was just like, this is a completely different like reality. Like, I don't exist there. So, you know, seeing the White House in pictures and like on TV was just something like kind of cool. And I was just like, oh yeah, like the White House. But to actually be there and see the White House in person, I was just like, oh my God. To, you know, Obama was president, so I was even more like touched by it.
Ooh,
Um,
yeah, that's
yeah,
awesome.
yeah.
Yeah, and that's actually a huge part. So you just highlighted two of like the biggest parts of our program, right? Was the
Hmm.
SAT program and shaping you and those skills. And then the exposure really is the second big piece of our program, where I think a lot of students from California have the UCs and the Cal States as these like,
Hmm.
you know, revered, they're also great colleges, but have
Yeah.
really not stepped outside of that comfort zone in terms of thought process for other colleges. So we really aim to bring you guys and help you see what your life could be like on these other colleges. Sadly, COVID took both of those kind of experiences away from us this year, but it sounds like it really shaped you and your decisions. So how did that go then once you started the applications, which you also mentioned earlier, Esmeralda, is like
Hmm.
students completely underestimate the amount of time that goes into that, you know?
Yeah, came back and I was just like even more motivated, I think, to continue to like work hard and like put my best foot forward at the SAT classes and like writing my personal statement and stuff. And during the summer between my like junior and senior year is when we started writing like our personal statements. And that took a while because I think a thing that a lot of students have is like they think their story is not unique enough or something like that. And then they kind of leave out like details where, you know, I think like sometimes they're really important to add, but because you're writing about yourself, you don't think it's necessarily important, but I think it's important for the reader to know. So it took me a while to get like a good personal statement. And with the help of Michelle, I was able to really like edit and like really like hone in on those messages and the themes that I wanted to talk about.
When it came time for Esmeralda to decide where she wanted to apply, she was torn between applying early decision or early action, which could have been binding and a very important and serious commitment, versus applying regular decision. This is something many students, even today, struggle with. If you apply early decision, you are essentially binding yourself to that college if accepted. Now, if you apply early action, this is not binding, but offers a bit more flexibility. And you are still telling the college that you have selected them as your top choice. For Esmeralda, this was a very important decision she had to make.
You know, something told me not to. I don't know what, but something really was just like, hold off. I think you're kind of rushing into things.
Mhm.
And I was like, I think you're kind of overreacting. You should just like relax and things will work out and you'll find the school that you like will like the best from the ones you get into. So you should just be patient. Um,
Mhm.
which I think it was like the end of March, and at that point, a lot of schools had already come out. So I had already heard back from like the UCs and a couple of private schools like Wellesley and Bowdoin, and like Scripps College and stuff. So I already had like a couple of options. And then there was that big Ivy Day. So I applied to 7 of the 8 Ivies. I think the only one I didn't apply to was Cornell.
Mhm.
And I was really, really blessed and lucky and just like shocked that I had gotten into Yale, Brown, Princeton, um, Dartmouth, UPenn, and Columbia. Those were the ones I got into. And I was just so shocked. I was just like, this is a joke. I don't think this is correct. um,
Mhm.
but it was just a very emotional time for me. And then I went home and it was really interesting because I guess my parents didn't really know about these schools because, you know, on the
Yeah.
West Coast, it's not really talked about, especially in Latinos, like within Latino communities. So I
Mhm.
remember like talking to my parents and I was just like, oh, I got into this school and this school and this school. And then they were like, where's that? Like, where's that? And I was like, oh, this is the school that like Bill Clinton went to, or like And then like I would say like Obama went here and stuff, or
Obama,
like
right?
Michelle
Yeah, the
Obama.
one they do.
Yeah. They didn't really know how to like answer, I guess, because it was just
Yeah.
very shocking for them.
Yeah, a lot of time parents don't really know how to react, right?
Yeah,
Obviously, they're supportive and excited, but probably fearful as well and nervous.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So at the time, I mean, still am, but I was really passionate about like the medical scene within the Latinx community, because I feel like there's a huge disconnect between like the medical field, especially you can see it a lot now with the coronavirus, but there's a huge disconnect between like medical field and like Latinx communities,
Mhm.
because there's especially with the language barrier, sometimes it's just really hard for there to be like a straight connection between both sides. So I used to see that a lot when I volunteered at the hospital when I was a sophomore in high school. And that's kind of what really motivated me to really want to be part of the medical field. I visited Brown and I didn't really enjoy it. I didn't really find, like, I just didn't really connect with the campus as much as I thought I would. And then I went to Yale and it was a little bit more, I felt a little bit more at home because of the residential aspect that Yale really tries to cultivate with their students. And so that's kind of how things worked out for me. But I think going to the campus is really important, which is why it's unfortunate right now when all
Yeah.
of this stuff is happening and people can't actually go in person.
Yeah.
It's going to make it decisions a lot harder. But I'm sure students can really try to give them a better idea, like current students give them a better idea of what it's like to be on campus.
Yeah, colleges are really doing the best that they can to offer these types of opportunities. Like, for example, our juniors are applying to virtual fly-in programs. I think in your story, you mentioned two things that I just really quickly want to unpack. And one is, you were, if for some reason you had worked your way up to all of this, you had the support with Michelle and your counselor and whatnot, but you were still surprised. So what do you think
Mm-hmm.
it was in your applications that stood out to these colleges that saw something in you?
Yeah, I think I was just really honest about things. I feel like I
Yeah.
feel in the beginning, I feel like yes, I was really caught up in like I don't want to be cliche and I want to be like I want to make my my essay super literary, like with literary devices everywhere and just like a beautiful writing piece. And a personal statement can be that, but I think in my case, it was just better to just be direct and just like really talk to them and really, talk about where I came from and like my life and not really try to make it super fluffy, right? And just like be
Mhm.
direct and be honest. I think I really shared my passion. I'm still really passionate about helping build bridges with the Latinx communities. Um, and I really shared about how my experience with that and how like my parents were some people that I really, that share or have their experience is shared by a lot of other people, and that's something that I really connect with. So I was really honest, and as well as I think my interviews were again like a great way for them to add an extra layer to my applications.
Right. I think that a lot of times students forget that your application has several components to it, and readers are
Mhm,
reading hundreds of them. And so to add that
right.
layer of an interview puts a human face and a human voice to the writing where you are so limited. Esmeralda had also been accepted to Brown's prestigious PLME program in medical education, but ultimately she found her best fit at Yale. After several interviews, admitted student weekends, and alumni luncheons with her parents, Esmeralda finally decided that Yale was the place she could see herself for the next 4 years. It also came down to financial aid and what her parents could afford. And in the end, Yale provided much more financial support than the other colleges who accepted her. Here you are now, the first in your family to be, attend a college outside of California, but be so far away. So,
Mhm.
tell us a little bit about that journey, that first year journey and the transition, and
Yeah,
how did you get involved?
right. I think the journey was I think it's really different than what a lot of other students go through. Yale is really far away. Not only is it really far away, but it's also in a very unique city where it's not like a big city, so you can't just like fly there. Like you can't just. It's not like LAX where you can just go from LAX to New York
Mm-hmm.
in one plane. So then that was another thing I kind of had to overcome, was like figuring out how to get to New Haven from New York. And so that was really interesting because it really taught me how to be more independent, and kind of figure things out on my own. And I went for a pre-orientation program. So what the cool thing about Yale is they have several pre-orientation programs, and they're kind of meant for students to have an extra opportunity to make like connections with, peers, and to kind of get a little bit more used to campus before like the academic year starts, right? So my pre-orientation program was called Cultural Connections, and it's aimed for a lot of people of color. And it gives a space for a lot of us to talk about some of the things that we worry about coming to a predominantly white institution. And so it kind of just gives you a good foundation for the rest of your year. So a lot of the people I met there actually became some of my really good friends till this very day, because we already had something in common. A lot of us already had something in common, coming from low-income neighborhoods, or coming from, I mean, for me, a lot of the times it was like coming from Latinx communities. So that's kind of how my journey at Yale started. It kind of gave me some training wheels, I guess, to kind of how to approach Yale. And then right after that, we had like move-in day. And I think that's kind of where the biggest difference I saw between like my experience at Yale and a lot of other people's experience was like everybody's parents came because to them it was a big like family event, because like not every day will your kid move into college, let alone Yale. So it was like a big deal for a lot of people, right? And unfortunately my parents couldn't make the trip out there with me, and so I had to basically like move in alone. And I remember having like one big suitcase and like a carry-on, and that was it, which is not a lot considering like how many things it takes to make up a dorm room. So yeah, so it was just a really different experience, because like the day that everybody was so excited with their family and their friends and stuff, I was kind of on my own. I guess to me, I was just like, wow, is this really how it's gonna be for the rest of my time here? Like, is it gonna feel like kind of this lonely? And I think for me it was like, will my parents ever come visit this place, right? Because a lot of the times I think for me, like thinking about why it's so important for my parents to see this like institution is not just because it's pretty, right? I mean, it is a beautiful campus, like that's, you can't say that's not true, but for me it's like for them to actually see like what all of their sacrifice got like achieved, because for them, like just thinking about where they grew up, like this is just something they would have never seen, right? So to me it's just like something for them to kind of for them to see what their hard work like
it must have
led
been
to, right?
emotional for sure, definitely an
Yeah.
emotional experience.
So I think that was like the big eye opener for me, was like I realized that like people in general just come from a wide range of backgrounds, and I think for me one of the biggest things I continue to try to take into myself and like implement is like not to make assumptions on people, like to kind of stop myself in tracks, and kind of keep myself from like making assumptions, and actually trying to learn or know this person before I assume things about them. I guess the one time that I really I felt really out of place was one of my first classes as a first year, where I actually was enrolled in a seminar. So the cool thing about Yale is that it has a first year seminar group of courses that allow students to kind of like pick from all these really interesting topics. And so this one of the first classes I took was a fashion class. So the topic was like London and Paris fashion from 19 something to this time or whatever. It was like a specific time period. The one time, so we were having a discussion on designer. So at some point we started talking about Chanel, like YSL, and like all of these like designer brands that started back in the 1900s. So we were talking about that, and I think at some point somebody was like, oh, when I was in Paris, I went to the Hermes store, and I remember seeing this bag, and my mom, and like she just had this really crazy story about how her mom just like happened to have this amazing bag, and how she saw like the changes and trends, and it was cool. I mean, she wasn't saying it to be rude or anything, but that's when I was like, oh, yeah, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, I mean, I had to do a project on Dior, on Christian Dior. So I learned about fashion that way, but I had never, owned a luxury item like that. So yeah, I was just like so shocked by like how casual, my peer talked about going to Paris and traveling there during fashion week and like just having all this experience with like designer items. And I was like, I've never left LA before
Well,
this.
but
I
what's
don't
so
even know what
unique
you're talking
about,
about.
I was going to say, but like, I feel like
Yeah.
that's kind of an interesting circle that you took though, because you also grew up with your dad who created some of these garments, I'm sure,
Yeah.
like in a very different context. And it's almost like your story is probably, or your dad is probably what created some of the designer things that these people were wearing. It's just, it's a very interesting
It's
dynamic.
yeah. Exactly. Yeah, it was really interesting for me to experience that, I guess. That's one of the few times I was like, oh yeah, like this is what Yale is like.
Another added culture shock to Esmeralda's experience was meeting a wide array of people from the Latinx community. While they could relate culturally, there were still so many things that made them different.
So I saw people from like all walks of life, right? And I was just so amazed by it
Very
sometimes.
eye-opening, I'm sure. It's
Yes.
just like you said it's basically all the different socioeconomic groups. I think sometimes when we
Yeah.
think diversity, we just think it's like ethnic and cultural,
Hmm.
but there are like all kinds of layers to diversity for sure. Because you were
Exactly.
probably also
So,
surrounded by, like you mentioned, like by a bunch of other Latinos, but again, Latinos who probably also
mhm.
had the experience of going to Paris every summer, and yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like some of them were like yeah, they just didn't or I remember meeting somebody from Mexico, like they were actually from Mexico, right? And it was interesting because we just had two completely different experiences. So they just had a very different lifestyle than I was used to, right? And when I thought about my experience as being Mexican American, it was just I had nothing like in common with them, right?
Mm.
Basically just like maybe Spanish, but even then their Spanish was really different than mine.
When it came time to decide on a major, Esmeralda was torn. She went into Yale with one goal in mind, and that was the pre med track. However, over time, things changed, and so did her interests.
I still was like really passionate, and I still am passionate about like going into medical school or like so when I first started at Yale, I was like, okay, cool, I'm gonna be a bio major, so then by the time I leave Yale, I'll have all the prerequisites to apply to medical school, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's what I started off as, and that's what a lot of students at Yale do, and a lot of other students at other colleges do, is they start off as biology majors because they want to be pre-med, or they are pre-med. And I think at the end of my first semester sophomore year, I started to realize that I wasn't really happy with my biology major. Like a lot of the classes I was taking were not really interesting to me, and they were kind of just like a check mark, like
Mm-hmm.
a tick mark or a check mark on the box to kind of fulfill things that I wasn't really interested in. My motivation was kind of going down, and I wasn't really like as uh, passionate about the biology as I thought I would be. I was just like, I just have to tough it through. I'm sure other people are experiencing the same, like, thoughts as I am. Like they're having the same thoughts, but they're just like kind of pushing through and like getting to the end. Towards the end of my sophomore year, I got this email from another program I'm part of, the SCS Noonan Scholars Program,
Mm-hmm.
and I got an email from one of their like collaborators where they help like first gen women like get internships at like tech industries or finance industries. Um, so I like ended up talking to this person, and she really talked to me, or she was really like questioning me in terms of like, oh, what do you like to do? Like it seems like you're not really happy with what you're doing. You might want to reconsider. And so I think that was kind of the sign I
Mm-hmm.
needed. Um, so I went back to school and I talked to the department chair for the chemical engineering program, because at that point I had like realized, okay, chemical engineering seems to line up a lot with the courses I had previously like taken. So it was really hard at that point, but I pushed through like chemical engineering, my chemical engineering major for the last 2 years. And I learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about like critical thinking. I think that's kind of the biggest thing that I think people need to develop more, or like kind of use more, is like their critical thinking skills. So I think like the major really did teach me how to do that. And I didn't like do well with, I didn't like pass with flying colors, like, and that's something that I think I had to learn, is like to be okay with not being perfect, because I guess in high school, like I was a pretty much straight A student, taking like basically every AP class like my school offered. I think the fact that I learned how to fail, was like that one eye opener when I was like, yeah, there's a lot more to life than just grades. And sometimes it's not just the grade that shows how much you learned, but a lot of my professors were like very big on like just making sure that you knew what you were doing, but not necessarily like focused on what grade you got in the class, which I think was really helpful. And to add on to that, like chemical engineering is a very difficult major. And my class size for my senior year was, I think, 13 students. And
Wow.
within those 13 students, within those 13 students, I think I was like the only Latina there.
Wow.
The only
How quite an
Latina,
accomplishment.
and like not that many girls either. It was very like very low level of women compared to men. And that's kind of common in a lot of engineering fields, which is unfortunate.
Not only had Esmeralda made it this far, but she had also started preparing for her parents' first visit to Yale's campus. With graduation in sight, Esmeralda and the entire graduating class of 2020 were hit with a national pandemic that completely changed what Esmeralda had envisioned for this major milestone in her life. So you're about to graduate,
Right.
you're about to, celebrate this huge milestone, not just for you, but for your family. And then COVID hits. So what
Right.
happened then? And then where has it brought you to?
Yeah, I think the COVID-19 pandemic has, I think, really brought out a lot of issues that I think the country needs to reevaluate, right? But I think everybody has been impacted by this virus in so many different ways. Honestly, I felt really defeated, because I guess I had been working so hard, and I was just trying to finish on this really positive note with like my best foot forward. But with this happening, I felt like I was just not like, I just felt like it wasn't as like rewarding as I would have liked it to be. It was kind of just like, oh, I was really looking forward to getting that like hands-on experience in lab, and finishing something and really feeling really proud about it. And then people, when they finish their thesis, they typically take a photo in front of our library. So I was just really looking forward to having that, like that culmination moment. And at some point, graduation happened, and it was just the most like anticlimactic thing I've ever experienced. Like, and like the mailman delivered my diploma, and that was kind of it. It was just like this huge like paper, and like it's the thing about the Yale diploma is it's in Latin, so you can't actually read what it says. So
Oh,
we all kind of joke about that. We were like, we work so hard for this paper we can't even read.
that's so interesting. Esmeralda was quickly rushed home, where she had to finish the last semester of her senior year. Everything from her research, senior seminars, and graduation ceremony were conducted online. Sometime over the summer, Esmeralda and her brother returned to Yale to retrieve the remaining items that represented her 4 years in college. Esmeralda never had a chance to say goodbye to her professors, classmates, or friends. She is now back in Los Angeles with her parents, who never had a chance to visit Yale or see where their daughter lived the last few years. It would have been their first time traveling outside of California.
Yeah.
I mean, I just can't imagine though that like moment of your parents finally seeing, all of the accomplishments that you had done through the last 4 years, seeing what your life was like for the last 4 years, and just experiencing that moment with you. And so I am just so sorry that was pulled from under you. Ugh, and I really wish that things would be different now. We'll see. So Esmeralda, here you are 4 years later, a graduate from Yale, and have worked so hard to get to this point. Where do you see yourself moving forward from here?
Yeah, I guess right now I took some time off after graduation to kind of just like regroup, right? But I guess in the future I'm really looking forward to entering the industry for chemical engineering, and like being involved in like some of the things I really want to do is like work for a company like BOEING, because I feel like it has a really direct impact the way that like people travel, and I think that's super interesting. So that's some of the things that I'm really looking forward to. But at the same time, I really hope that like somehow I'm able to connect back to my community in my job. And so right now it's like not, it might not necessarily be through my job. I really enjoy like talking to students. So like through College Match and through like my job back at Yale, I was like a ambassador. So I would talk to students when I came home and like really try to share my story and like, be really, at least be helpful, hopefully for someone. So at the same time, I really hope that my job in the future kind of involves giving back to my community somehow and just being involved.
Nice. And what would you tell then your like past self, as a rising freshman? What would be one piece of advice that you would share with your past self?
think I think I would just say college is not only about growing academically, but also like socially. And I think, you know, it's really hard to like go from only being socially, I mean, academically driven to being like in a social environment. I think I feel like I would like to be a little bit more open back then.
Sometimes we forget about the social and fun piece of college. So,
Exactly.
with that said, what were some of the funnest experiences you had, and what do you do for fun now? And some of your
Oh,
hobbies.
yeah. I guess in college, some of the best memories I've had was during the Harvard Yale game. So every year, Harvard and Yale face off in football. It's like one of the oldest rivalries I think in the country. So it's really fun, and I like have quite a couple friends at Harvard. So we come together once a year and we kind of just like have fun. And I think that's a really nice way to kind of network outside of Yale as well. And hobbies. So I'm a big runner. I didn't run in high school, I at all, but now I do. So at the end of high school, I got into like running long distance, and so throughout college, I did that, and I ran 2 marathons while I was at college. So during
Awesome.
the spring breaks, I would come home and I would run the LA marathon. So I did that twice, and it was really a really great experience. Like I grew a lot in terms of like mental endurance was like a really important part of that. So it really helped me develop that. I feel like I have a very unique perspective sometimes on things, just because of my education. Sometimes I feel like Yale is a interesting place to receive an engineering degree. So I feel like even though we have all the engineering courses, like we still had time to take a lot of fun courses that other engineers might not have had. So I feel like me and like a lot of us can think on a lot of different levels with a
Very
lot of
well
different
rounded.
perspectives.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Excellent. So let's move into my favorite round, or my favorite segment, which is called the
Hmm.
flash round of our podcast. Now, these are questions that some
Hmm.
students actually see on applications. You may remember them, but in many
Okay.
ways, they also represent you as a now graduate. So the first one is, if you were creating a playlist about your
Yeah.
life, and there was one song or what would be one song that you would want to include on that represented you?
Um, anything Mana is really good. I think the reason why is I guess I'm really trying to kind of keep in touch with my like roots, and I think one of the ways that I do that is by music.
That literally they're
Hmm.
generational, and they still sell out
Hmm.
like venues and concerts
Exactly.
many years later. So very cool. All right, so my last question, and that's actually a really beautiful way to end this podcast in terms of legacy, is
Hmm.
if there was a final kind of quote or message that you would want to leave with the audience today, what would that be?
Yeah. I think the one quote that I really, really like sometimes like gravitate towards, and I've gravitated towards it for a long time. It's kind of brutal though, but it's just like it's a Winston Churchill quote, and it's like, if you're going through hell, keep going. Even though it's like it kind of sounds a little harsh, but I think that's something I've kind of like taken up a lot, especially like with running. Like running can be kind of difficult, especially like during marathons. Like at the end of it, you're kind of dying, but you're basically almost there. And that's kind of one of the quotes that kind of kept me going, was like, come on, like you'll be fine. Like you
Yeah.
can just look towards like the end. And especially this last year, I was just like, yeah, this is the last lap, right? So I kind of always kept that in mind.
Nice. What a beautiful way to end the podcast. It's that persistence and that feeling
Hmm.
of wanting to keep going no matter how hard it gets. So thank you so much for
Exactly.
sharing that, Esmeralda. Thank you for your
Hmm.
openness, your honesty, and really just your advice, because I get, again, in the next few months are going to be brutal for those rising seniors and
Yeah.
also for our rising college freshmen, those who are starting college this year. And so it's all about listening to these stories and taking what you can with them. So thank you
Exactly.
so much for sharing.
Thank you for having me.
I have no doubt that Boeing or any other company will be lucky to have Esmeralda on their team. As a first-generation Latina engineer, graduate from Yale University, marathon runner, and proud East LA resident, she is destined to leave a positive impact on the future generations of women leaders. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode, where I hope now you can see the full circle of what College Match is all about. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like and subscribe to our podcast. Next week, you'll hear from another incredible student who is navigating his way through senior year and leaving a lasting impact on his community. And of course, to find out more about College Match LA, visit www.collegematchla.org. See you next time.